You're listening to the Rite Retirement Show.
The 70% of people out there listening to the show today are going to need some level of care. It doesn't necessarily mean that 70% are going to end up in a nursing home, but 70% of people will need some assistance out there. The biggest fear is running out of money for the retiree, but what we see is not enough people spend enough of their money.
Cris prides himself in what matters to you. This is the Rite Retirement Show.
Hi there, I'm Luann Fulmer, and welcome to the Rite Retirement Show. Today with Graham Bauer. He is certified financial planner, financial advisor, and enrolled agent at WG Financial Group. Here today to give us some helpful advice about retirement planning. And if you have any questions about anything we talk about today, I want to make sure you have this number, 256-937-2010. You can reach out to our team. Guys, it is complimentary. Now, you may call the number to get on the calendar. You can text. We make it very simple. If you like to text the word visit to 256-937-2010. Remember, check us out on Facebook, WG Financial Group 256. It's going to be updated with any news headlines that may occur during this week, anything related to retirement planning. And remember, our motto is plan, retire, and play. That is our goal for you. Find us online at WGFinancialGroup.com. And remember, this show is available on Spotify and Apple. Just search for the name of our show, The Rite Retirement Show. Graham, so excited to be here with you today.
Hey, Luann, great to be with you as well. Sorry if I sound a little groggy at first. I had a long delay on a flight last night, so running off a little bit less sleep than usual.
Running on empty?
I'm not on empty, I would say, but me and Emma agreed. When we got home, we were like, we need to start putting a day in between getting back from a trip and going back to work.
I know.
I think booking trips is kind of like when you go grocery shopping and like you're not hungry and you feel like you want to be healthier that week, and then you get home and realize you don't have anything you want to eat. It's like in the moment when I was booking the trip, it's like, oh no, I'll be fine.
We'll be fine, yeah.
And then you get there and you're like, ooh, well, would have been nice to have a day.
You are young to learn this because Bobby and I are still, we're still going, oh, we need a day. We just can't, we just cannot even remember that either. So good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. We definitely travel at this point in our lives a lot different than most of my clients travel, which is good. I mean, when you get to that stage in life where you want to, ball out a little bit more on the vacations, I think I definitely will when I get older, but I'm always kind of a cheapskate and like, we went to New York City, so we didn't rent a car or anything. And we were talking about on our last day there, we were like, man, every vacation we book, we tend to end up walking like 7+ miles a day just because we don't want to rent a car. They have transit and it's fun. But after a few days, you're like, man, I wouldn't complain about being behind the wheel right now instead of walking a mile back to the hotel.
That is a lot of walking, definitely. That's why you're so tired too,
Yeah, it's good exercise though. I mean, you walk off all the food you eat. So
exactly.
It gives you a higher limit. You kind of just break even. So you can't complain about that.
Yeah, well, good. I'm glad you guys had a good time. So happy you had a little break. That's awesome. Now, why don't we start off then with just a little bit of what's going on in the market right now, Graham? Can you give us an update?
Sure, yeah. I'll be pretty quick with this today. The market's been seemingly in kind of a bit of a holding pattern the last couple of weeks. It's down a little bit as of today when we're recording this, but I think really when we're going to find out maybe some more of the direction of where we're headed is the end of next week. So September 11th, actually, I believe, is when the CPI and the PPI reports are going to come out, when the Bureau of Labor Statistics is going to release that. So that'll be really telling because last month, inflation in both of those categories heated up a little bit more than they were hoping for. So the question is going to be, is that trend going to continue, or, was maybe that just kind of a mid-end of summer blip that can happen sometimes? That'll be what they're looking for. And that's also going to be, a big indicator on what's going to happen with interest rates, because there's a very, very, very good chance based on the futures that we're going to see a rate cut here in a couple weeks. Right. And so that, that's kind of already priced in to the markets. That's not going to make the markets explode when we have a rate cut, because everybody's kind of expecting that. Jerome Powell, all but said that in a press conference recently.
Right.
So the question is then looking forward to future Fed meetings, future rate cuts, what's going to happen there. And these are going to be the numbers that kind of dictate that. So next week when we record, that will not have come out yet. So I guess it'll be 2 weeks from now. We'll probably be talking about that a little bit, as that's going to be kind of an important piece. But that's really kind of what's going on right now. There have been some companies like NVIDIA had their earnings call and everything, and that's moved things a little bit. But overall, the big things that everybody's waiting for is kind of that data. So.
Right. And I know Chris will want to talk about that. He's all into that, but not here for today. He will be back though, just missing today with us because he's a busy guy, right?
Yes. Yeah. And we'll wait to talk about it till he's here, because I'm sure he'd want to be here for that.
Yes. Okay. So now why don't you give us a federal minute for us too, please?
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of the year, which it's kind of crazy. It doesn't feel like the year's been going on.
I don't
that long,
even
want to 9 months.
I don't want to think about it. I don't. Dang.
I know, we're in holiday season, just about.
No,
but
do not say it.
Just about.
Yeah.
But that's also when a lot of future budget for the federal government start to be solidified, as well as the raises for federal government employees. So there was a pay plan submitted by the White House to Congress that would put the raise for federal employees for 2026 at about 1%.
Oh.
And so that's probably a little bit lower than a lot of people were hoping for.
Oh, lower. Okay.
Yeah, it's the lowest since 2015, actually. So it's been a little bit higher than that since then, especially those last few years. Now, that is not going to include law enforcement officers, federal law enforcement officers, and they haven't exactly defined who that all applies to yet, but it's looking like they're going to get more, like a 3.8% increase.
Okay.
So,
we'll get
but
it.
for your rank and file federal employee, in most cases, it's looking like a 1% pay increase. So I don't know. I kind of wonder if this is another piece of the, maybe trying to get some more people to take a buyout or take a VSIP or Vera or something, just saying, hey, you're not going to stick around for a huge raise. Not that people usually are expecting a massive raise working for the federal government every year, but it's just compared to inflation, compared to what it's been for the last really 4 or 5 years, it is on the lower side. So just wanted to mention that to everybody today. And we'll see. That's not solidified exactly yet, but that's what it's looking like at this point.
Awesome. Well, awesome in a way. I'm glad the law enforcement officers are getting a bigger raise, but 1%'s better than nothing, I guess, right? Yeah.
Yeah, you'll take what you can get.
Exactly. All right. Now, you wanted to talk about a really good topic, and I'm so glad you want to bring this up. It's about special needs. So it'd be like retirees with children who have special needs, possibly. Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah. This can look like a lot of different things. So I had a client actually send me an email last week, and it was just like, hey, Graham, during our initial meetings, we talked a lot about special needs planning. That would be a really good topic to talk about on the radio. And I was like, oh, that lines up well, actually, because I'm, doing radio just me today. So I needed a topic. And this is something that we've certainly hit on, on the radio before to an extent. But one thing he mentioned in the email that I think was a really good point is that a lot of times I think people just think about it as, oh, well, I don't have a child with special needs, so that's not going to apply to a lot of people. But I mean, in reality, I think a lot of us have someone in our family, whether it's, a child or a sibling or a cousin, an aunt, an uncle, someone who is affected by, some special needs in some way. I mean, at this point in the United States, about 1 in 4 adults have some kind of disability, a little more than 1 in 4. Now, that's not saying that 1 in 4 people are, on government assistance for their disability. That can be a wide range of things. But it just kind of shows. I remember when I was going through my CFP training, one thing they talked about was disability insurance, and that's not really something I'm going to talk about today. But he was mentioning how few people have disability insurance and compared to life insurance, when from a statistical standpoint, your likelihood of dealing with a disability is much higher than your likelihood of dying, young. just based on current statistics. So thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But I'm going to be talking more about retirement planning and legacy planning as it pertains to special needs. So a lot of this does pertain to having a child, but it's also good information to pass along if you have, a brother or a sister that has a child, or a brother or a sister that is, has some kind of special needs. It can apply in a lot of different situations. So I'm going to be talking mostly about the Social Security definition of disability. Okay. So there's a few different ones out there. What someone would be considered disabled by for insurance, long-term disability insurance is going to be different than what would be like military disability. People can be on military disability, and that's more pertaining to, ailments from active duty. So you can still be working and be on military disability. Where Social Security, their definition is inability to do any substantial gainful activity by reason of any medically determinable physical or mental impairment. Wow. So it's more for people who are not able to work really at all because of their disability in one way or another. Yes. And there are two kinds of disabilities in this context, or really benefits through Social Security. There's SSI and SSDI. Okay. SSI, I'll start there, is a little bit more needs-based. Okay. So, think if there's somebody that has some kind of disability where they're not able to work and they don't have the financial resources to take care of themselves at all because of that, they haven't worked, maybe they're in their 20s, they haven't worked long enough to be eligible for Social Security benefits of any kind, they would be eligible for SSI. Okay. That also usually comes along with Medicaid. Okay. And it has a pretty low monthly amount that you get. So you get, I think the max right now is like $943 a month. So it's pretty low. Okay. And in addition to that, you can't have more than $2,000. I think it's state by state, but generally $2,000 of total assets. So you qualify. Could,
if you worked a second job or something like that, then you couldn't make any more than $2,000.
So there's income limits, and then there's the asset limit. But the asset limit is like if you had $5,000 in your bank account, you would be ineligible. Wow. For the SSI benefits. So that is really more of a needs-based thing. And then there's SSDI, which is Social Security Disability Insurance. Oh. And that is more geared towards people who have worked long enough to be eligible for Social Security and become disabled, but they're not between 62 and 67 yet, so they can't claim their own benefit. Okay. So, for example, you're 50 years old and, you have an accident at the workplace that renders you unable to work. And at that point, you could, potentially qualify for SSDI and get payments that would, convert to normal Social Security once you come of age for that. But you're basically just kind of accelerating your Social Security benefit that you would have gotten. So it's not really needs-based. There's still limits on income and everything, but it's not, they're different from a needs-based perspective. Okay. So those are the two we're going to be looking at. Okay. And for a lot of people, especially if you have a child that has a disability, both of those could apply at some point or another in the child's life. Sometimes people are kind of switching between the two, and I can kind of go into that. So the first thing that we talk to people about when, we're talking about special needs planning, if you have, we'll just say a child that's disabled, or really if you're leaving money to a special needs beneficiary. I had a client who had a cousin who was disabled that they wanted to leave some money to because they financially support them. Yeah. And if they're on SSI, you don't just want to leave them the money because, as I mentioned a minute ago, if you have, $200,000 in an IRA and you want to leave them 25% of that, that's $50,000. So too much. That would push them over the limit. Yeah. And they would become ineligible for SSDI until that money is spent down. And, I think the thing that people kind of forget about, and probably the more important part of that, is not only do you lose that, 900 whatever bucks a month, but you lose your Medicaid access to your healthcare, which for a lot of people is the even more important part. Because, if you have some kind of disability that racks up a lot of doctor's bills, that can end up being a lot more money. Yeah, you really need Medicaid to help you. Yeah, you really do need some extra payments. So in that case, you would want to set up what's called an S&T. We call them special needs trusts a lot of times. This is something you could do through a lawyer. We have good
Okay.
referrals for this that we send people to. And that really is a type of trust that's going to be able to accept those funds without affecting their SSI
Oh,
slash
okay.
Medicaid eligibility.
Okay.
Another benefit to that is you have a trustee looking over the funds as well, because, sometimes people can have, mental impairments due to disabilities, and you don't
Mhm.
necessarily just want to leave them, $50,000 and say, go figure out
Yeah.
what to do with it.
Yeah.
But you can kind of leave in a way where, there's a trustee looking over it. They're not totally alone trying to figure out what they want to do. And, it doesn't affect that, those payments and the Medicaid that they're getting. So I think that's the foundation of making sure your, child, anybody that you're leaving money to, or if you know somebody who has a special needs child, it's just a really important thing to have set up, have in place, because you really don't want to make them ineligible for those benefits. Also, because, you might say to yourself, okay, well, yeah, they'd become ineligible till they spend it down, but they'd also have a couple $100,000.
Right.
And that is true. So they would be able to spend that down. But now once they've spent that down, they don't have any extra savings and they're just on SSDI and SSI and can't have more than $2,000 in the bank.
Right.
Rather than still getting their Medicaid, still getting their SSI, and having this trust that has more money in it that they can use for, if they need new equipment for something, or have a lot of doctor's bills, or want to pay for some better care homes is kind of a common thing, better living situations. So those are super duper important. That's in our section of our discovery session where we talk about, the kids. That's one of the questions. We go down the list. We ask a few questions about the kids, just to make sure that they're covered. But one of them, are any of them special needs? Because that's immediately is a kind of a signal to say, okay, yes, then we need to talk about this. So that's kind of the first aspect there.
And let me ask you this: so it would be better to set up a special needs trust than incorporating any type of life insurance, right?
So I'm kind of going to get into that a little bit too. A lot of times those go hand in hand though, a little bit.
Okay.
So the life insurance. So a lot of times, since you mentioned it, I'll just start the spiel now. So what people will do sometimes is they'll set up a life insurance policy because, they'll say when we pass away, we want to make sure our child has enough money to get really good care for the rest of their life. Because, in some situations, you might be in your 60s and your child with a disability could be in their 20s. And, not all disabilities make your lifespan much shorter than the average person. So they could live an extra, 40 years after you're gone.
Yes.
And you want to make sure they're taken care of. So they'll say, okay, we'll set up what's called a second to die life insurance policy where it doesn't pay out until the second parent passes away. So it's a little bit cheaper because of that. And if you had done that and you hadn't set up the special needs trust, you would run into the same problem as leaving them an inheritance.
That's what I wondered. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they would get the money and it would still be tax-free, but it would affect their eligibility for government assistance. So again, you would want to set that up with the beneficiary being the trust so it doesn't affect their eligibility. But yes, that is, a strategy that people do. Second piece is what's called an ABLE account. The acronym ABLE stands for Achieving a Better Life Experience. And these are accounts that are a little bit newer. Not quite as many people have them, but they're similar to the special needs trust in the fact that you want to use them because they don't affect, your eligibility up to a certain point. But they're different in regards to the individual, the child still technically owns this account, where the accounts in the special needs trust, they don't own, they're just the beneficiary of. So, these accounts are good for having a little bit more independence. There was a law passed recently that, if your child or an adult works, there's higher contribution limits. So, it's a good way to teach savings. I have clients who have kids that maybe work just a couple of days a week, at a local restaurant or at, a rec center or something like that, doing some odds and ends job and make a little money from that. And it can be a good exercise to, teach them a little bit about savings, to say, hey, put some money away here. You can invest money inside of those accounts. But what people usually do in most cases is that account kind of becomes almost like an emergency fund for the child because it's very accessible money that's not going to, affect your eligibility. So, I mentioned that $2,000 limit. You can have an ABLE account that's got, $30,000 on top of that, and it's not going to affect that limit. The limit is usually about $100,000 before an ABLE account starts to affect your eligibility for other government benefits. So a lot of people, like I said, kind of use it a little bit more like an emergency fund to funnel money into. Parents can make contributions, grandparents can make contributions, and the beneficiary, the individual, can make their own contributions. So it's something I recommend. There's a lot of great companies out there that hire people with special needs and give them jobs here and there, and they can earn some money from it. And it's a good way to teach about savings and also build up a little bit of that balance. So that's kind of the second account that I'm a big, or second piece that I'm a big fan of for that the planning element of that. The third piece, and I would say probably the most important and the most complicated, and I probably don't even have time to get into all the little nuances of this, is the Social Security element for the actual benefits received. So I talked a minute ago about the difference between SSI and SSDI.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, what ends up happening is, let's say you had your first child, was born with Down syndrome when you were 40 years old. Let's just say you were 40. Yeah. And when they turn 18, they're eligible for SSI benefits. They work maybe just like one day a week doing something, but overall they're just kind of taking SSI benefits. At that point, you're 58 years old. Okay. When you turn 62, you're eligible for Social Security. If you take your Social Security at that point, at 62, you're going to have a 30% reduction. Right. However, your child is going to be eligible for, at that point, half of your benefits. So if your benefit is, let's say at 67, it was $4,000 a month. So, at 62, I'm going to just round and say it's $3,000 a month. They'd actually be eligible for $1,500. So the max SSI benefit is like $943 a month. And at that point, they could jump up to $1,500 a month of what's called a DAC benefit, a disabled adult child, which is based on your Social Security amount.
Okay. But does that affect so if you're passing that on to your child, does that affect your Social Security amount, like your full retirement age?
It does. Yeah. So I'm not necessarily making the recommendation that you take it at 62. But that's kind of how it would, that's how it would look. Gotcha. So at that point, and this is a scenario that's actually very common in, special needs planning situations. The spouse might also not have worked because she was taking care, of your child. And so she's going to be eligible for your benefit too. So what happens at that point? So at that point, you're getting into what's called the Social Security Family Maximum. And this is one of the dumbest calculations that has ever been created by mankind. It doesn't make any sense if you really look at the numbers. But if I'm going to round to make it easy, it's around 175% of your full retirement age amount. Wow. So I'm sorry if I lose a couple people here, but basically what that means is if your full retirement age amount is, I'm going to use that same example, $4,000 a month, times that by 1.75, that's $7,000 a month. That is the maximum amount that can be received by your entire family. Wow. The cool thing about that is that family maximum is not affected by you filing early. Okay. So if you file at 62 and you're eligible for, $3,000 a month, your spouse is eligible for half of that, and your, disabled adult child is eligible for half of that as well, you could collect $6,000 a month at 62 years old between the three of you. Wow. So what we've ended up finding is that for most people, their max that they're going to hit as far as like total Social Security benefits received is around 63 or 64 years old. At that point, if you have two people on there, it's going to kind of cap out. So if you wait till 67 and to collect, you actually wouldn't receive any more benefits than you would have total because of the family maximum than if you had collected at 63, 64. Now, before you run out and do that, I'm still not necessarily making the recommendation that you do that because it does still affect things if you die. So when you're talking about, protecting your spouse, protecting your child, you want to make sure that's obviously going to be, of the utmost importance to you in this situation. So you want to make sure that if you pass away, there's going to be a loss of income. I'm not going to get into all the calculations of how that works too, because I know some people's heads are probably already spinning. But if you die, they're not going to receive that much anymore. And it's going to be based off of, the amount you were receiving when you died. And it's going to be less. So there's going to be a decent drop off.
So you're saying they will drop in their income when the adult parent passes away?
Yes. So if you were an individual collecting Social Security, if your wife or husband was collecting half your benefit and your disabled adult child was collecting half and you were hitting the family maximum, if you pass away, there will be a drop in income.
Okay.
They're not going to be, because now you only have 2 people collecting and they can't collect your entire benefit.
Okay.
And they're
deceased. Okay.
Yes, it becomes a much more complicated calculation, but
sure.
They are going to receive more if you wait until full retirement age and then pass away than they would if you took it at 62 and passed away, or 64. So it becomes a really complicated decision, in my opinion, because on the one hand, you're not going to receive any more benefits from a dollar for dollar perspective while you're all living at a certain age than if you waited till 67. But there is that spousal protection component. So I think that, in these type of situations, it's really good to talk to somebody that really knows Social Security, because the thing that really stinks about all of this is, you don't know what you don't know, and Social Security is not going to tell you. So I'll give an example. I ran into someone recently whose husband had been on SSDI for like 15 years, and they had 3 grandkids that they had not formally adopted, but were taking care of, staying at home with them.
Oh my.
They didn't know that for the last, 15 years, pretty much, if they had adopted the grandkids and, filed for extra benefits, the spouse could have received extra benefits because she has child in care under 16, and the 3 kids could have received benefits. So, it's who's to even say how much extra money that would have been over a 10, 15-year period. But the thing is, if you don't know about it, Social Security isn't going to knock on your door and say,
Here's some money.
Yeah, they're just going to say, you should have known, you should have known that yourself. So it's just really good to know if you have, minor children, if you, have a scenario where you've lost a spouse, especially if you have, disabled children. I think that it's really, really a good idea to talk to somebody and know what all of your options are, because like I said, it physically pains me when we talk to someone who would have been eligible for, all these benefits for years. And it's happened more times than I would like to say. And, even if they start getting it in the future, it's still like, you're not gonna make back up for what the difference of that money in the past.
Right.
So it's not like we can pull Social Security benefits out of thin air for every person that comes into the office. I wish that were true. It's certainly not. Some people, it's much more simple situation than that. But, in these scenarios, I think that it's really important. So those are kind of my 3 big things that I wanted to hit on for special needs planning. I think it's a really important topic.
I think so. I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, I just thought when, I had a client that wrote in, it was just a really good point that even though, I don't have a special needs child, a lot of people don't have a special needs child personally. I certainly have people close to me in my life that, do, or part of my family. So, I think a lot of people do in this day and age. So it's a topic that you want to make sure that, the people who you care about, who are, the most vulnerable, are protected and taken care of. And, it can actually affect retirement in a lot of ways. So you want to know what all is available to you.
And that is why we do this show. So we just thank you so much for joining us today. This is the Rite Retirement Show. Today with Graham Bauer only. Cris couldn't be here today, but Graham is a certified financial planner, financial advisor, and enrolled agent at WG Financial Group. And here's that phone number you may call or text with your own questions. If you text the word visit 256-937-2010. Remember, find us online at WGFinancialGroup.com. And this show is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just search for the name of our show, The Rite Retirement Show.
Market fluctuations can be unsettling. but a resilient plan can help maintain stability. Discuss how you might fortify your retirement strategy with Cris Wallace. Text VISIT to 256-937-2010 today to begin. Remember, text VISIT to 256-937-2010.
Are you a federal employee feeling pressure from the early retirement offers like VERA, VSIP, or the Deferred Resignation Program? Recent government initiatives have introduced significant changes to federal retirement programs, making employees feel pressured to consider early retirement or face potential layoffs. At WG Financial Group, we help guide federal employees through these uncertain times. Our team understands the complex federal retirement systems and can help you make informed decisions. Call 256-937-2010 to schedule your complimentary discovery session with us today. We'll help you assess your options and create a personalized retirement plan to help you feel more confident. Visit WGFinancialGroup.com or call 256-937-2010 to book your session. Firm is not affiliated with the U.S. government. Investment advisory services offered through AE Wealth Management, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor.
If lingering doubts like, have I saved enough? Or will my retirement funds endure? Are on your mind, it's time to consult with Cris Wallace. Text VISIT to 256-937-2010. That's 256-937-2010 to book your appointment and get the answers you need.
Great topic here. Thank you so much for joining us today. You are listening to the Rite Retirement Show, and we've been talking about special needs adult children and how that can affect retirements. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Graham, before we move on?
You know, like I said before, I think it's just one of those things that especially if it affects you directly in your life, you just want to know all of your options. But no, I think, those are kind of the three big things to have in order, to, know what you should be doing there, and really to just have a plan for your child, and, for your spouse. It's potentially going to have to take care of your child. So there's definitely a lot to go over there. And I said, I'm sure the Social Security gets some people's heads spinning, but that's what we're here for. So.
Right. And that's the cool thing about it is the reason we are talking about this is because a client brought this up to you. So you guys meet with all kinds of retirees, and this is a really good topic. So I'm glad you brought it to the forefront, and the other thing is when we go as a parent and our disabled child is left, you want to make sure that they're going to be getting the right support and services after our death. So you've got that to work into, making sure the caregivers are going to be there for them. I mean, that's a lot, but I just love that you guys come alongside everybody and can give them guidance and get them in touch with the right people. So I want to move on now to something that we know is coming, and you even mentioned it as we started off our show. We're going to probably have falling interest rates here. And so, for retirees, it's going to be a little challenging because we have all our money in our savings accounts. We're not going to be making enough or much off of those. But for other people, buying the homes and everything, the interest rates that are falling are good. But what would be some things people should be considering right now, Graham, to adapt to a new environment of lower interest rates?
Well, you brought up one of the primary things there, which I do think is, figuring out what you're going to do with some of those excess cash savings that people have. Over the past few years, I think it's been really, really easy to fall into, and I shouldn't say fall into, to just keep a little bit more cash than normal on hand because high yield rates have been really good. So, I've had clients tell me that, I don't want to take a whole lot of risk with any of this money right now just because I feel like I can get, 4.5%, 5% guaranteed. And, at this stage of my life, that's a pretty good return. And they're right. That is, over 6 months or 3 months or 8 months with a CD or being in a high yield fund, that is a pretty good return. But, pretty soon here, the levee's probably going to break on that a little bit. I wonder, and, there'll probably be a lot more fluctuations in my lifetime, but I wonder if this period of 5 years will be like my, 1980s Everybody always talks about like,
yeah.
oh man, I remember I hear clients say all the time, I used to be able to go to the bank and get a 12% CD or something like that. So I wonder if in 10 years from now, I'll be like, I used to be able to get a 5% money market rate.
Back in the 2025s.
All those years ago.
Oh my.
Yeah, in the 20s.
Yeah.
But so I think just, knowing what you're going to do for a longer term outlook with some of the money, because yes, over a 3 or 6 month period, if you just have some cash sitting in the bank, that's kind of your emergency fund, your sleep good money, then yeah, it was great to take advantage of the rates. But if you've been holding on to some extra cash on top of that, saying, I'm just going to just ride out these rates until they're gone, you do kind of need to know where you're going to be going from here, because as they start to come down, it's not going to be as advantageous. You're going to start probably at some point losing to inflation a little bit, as they start to come down. But the flip side of that, as you mentioned, is, a lot of people still have some form of debt in retirement. Obviously, I think the ideal for most people is to go into retirement debt-free.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality of it is a lot of people don't. I mean, I don't know exactly what the ratio is off the top of my head, but I would say probably 30 or 40% of people that we see have some kind of debt going into retirement. Usually not like bad credit card debt or like payday loans or anything, but more like, a car payment or finishing off their 30-year mortgage or something like that. Something a little smaller, little more inconsequential, because it'll get paid off in the next few years. But a lot of people still have a little bit. So, for those people, maybe looking at refinancing at some point. I do think people tend to maybe want to jump the gun a little bit on refinancing the second they hear about a first rate cut, just like how, I don't know. I find it kind of funny how I see like, we're looking for a house right now. And I see realtors say, oh, when this rate cut happens, housing prices are going to explode. I don't think a 25 basis point rate cut is going to make housing prices go up by 6 figures. But, give it 3 or 4 or 5 more rate cuts. And you could definitely see some movement. So, I think depending on the numbers that come out with CPI, PPI, what happens with everything, inflation and the tariffs, if we see some more rate cuts, then refinancing could be an option too. But there are definitely some opportunities. But I do think, like I said, for the cash investor, the person who's been leaning on those fixed income rates, they're going to need to be reevaluating a little bit.
Right. So, when in times like this, it's tempting to look at longer term bonds for better rates, maybe, but that means locking your money up for a long time. That's a big commitment. So what are your thoughts on something like that? How to approach maybe longer term bonds? What would you say?
Well, I mean, it is going to be for, fixed income, probably the better option at some point as rates come down a little bit. I think everybody's been hearing this so much over the last really 5 years, but because it is unusual, we've been in this inverted yield curve environment where short term is paying longer than long term. Because you'd usually think, if I'm giving my money to you for longer, shouldn't you be paying a higher interest rate? But that's not always how it works. So as this curve shifts a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised to see people start moving back towards long term a little bit. Now, the downside with that is that, long term bonds are going to be inherently riskier, as far as price fluctuation goes. So if you're saying that, I'm going to take out, instead of these little 6-month CDs, I want to take a 30-year bond. Well, if you plan to really, hold that bond for 30 years, you're not going to be nearly as risky on all fronts there. But if you're thinking, okay, well, I have some cash that is just sitting around at the bank, I'm going to put it in a 30-year bond. You're going to see a lot more price fluctuations, especially if you need that in the short term. So it's not really a great solution for like that cash liquid money that you just don't want to ever see go down in value. But, for someone saying, hey, I want to maybe catch a little bit more of the upside as rates come down, and, I'm doing this with more of my invested money, my longer term money, I do think it could be, it could be a good option, but there is a little bit more inherent risk. And I just usually associate the, person who has been really heavily invested in short-term, fixed income bonds, cash equivalents, all that type of stuff in the last 5 years is a pretty conservative investor overall. Usually it's not people who are, more okay with taking on higher levels of risk.
Yeah. And, whenever we hear interest rates are going down, bond rates are going up. So that's why I bring that up. But, okay. So if it's true, it looks like it is, we're going to have the lower interest rates. Like I said, we need to have those interest rates generate income for us in retirement. Give us some other maybe alternatives, other strategies that people would maybe want to consider.
Yeah. So, I'll say one to start out that, people in our client base have liked a little bit here recently, and really for the past few years is, it's called a MYGA, or a multi-year guaranteed annuity. It's really all that it is kind of a longer duration fixed interest rate type of product.
Oh.
So some people have just said, hey, if this is just cash and I don't want to, we have people that keep couple $100,000 in cash just because they like to have it, but they don't really have any intention of using the money in the next couple of years.
Uh-huh.
So if they say, hey, I'm going to put this in something that's 3 years long, paying whatever, 4%, because I know that at least I'll just be guaranteed to get that over the next 3 years, rather than having to, hunt different interest rates every 6 months, as they could be going down or up depending on what's going on with the Fed and everything. So some people have elected for that. Some people, I think have just wanted to maybe dip their toes back into investing a little bit more than they have been in the last few years. During basically really during and after the 2022 crash that we had, there were a lot of people that kind of freaked out by that. I think it was also just, a big time for retirements, because I think a lot of people used, 2020 as kind of an excuse to retire. And so that was pretty early into a lot of people's retirement. They kind of freaked out, or they were really close to retirement. Obviously, a ton of people in the world right now in the boomer age are either right at or very close to retirement. And, they became a lot more conservative, held on to a lot more cash than they usually would, and have kind of kept doing that for the last few years. We had a client who was holding on to a lot of cash and just kind of waiting for his black swan event. And, we had a review not too long ago, and he was like, I've been waiting for it for 4 years. I don't think it's coming. I think it's time to just, go back to the old strategy.
Yeah.
So I think for some people, that's going to be the approach to say, hey, maybe I understand that this is longer term money that I'm holding on to. Now that rates are going down, I'm not going to get quite as high of a guaranteed rate. Maybe I'm going to try to target that same 4 to 6% average over a long term, rather than just going for like a 4% guaranteed over the next, 6 or 8 months.
Right. Well, navigating uncertainties of interest rates and maintaining stable income in retirement is a little overwhelming, but this is what you guys do. You help your clients address all these challenges. I know this is something that, you will talk about to people if they have questions. Like we're saying, if you have questions, give us a call and you can meet with our team at WG Financial Group. Let me give out your phone number, Graham. The phone number is 256-937-2010. That's how you can reach out to our team at WG Financial Group. They are here for you. This is a complimentary meeting, okay? A discovery session. Text the word visit to this number if you prefer texting, 256-937-2010. And also remember, check us out at WGFinancialGroup.com. But I know, Graham, you guys love meeting with new people from the radio, from television, and you'll just take them in. And I know you love answering their questions, don't you?
Yeah, no, we love our radio listeners. We joke they always usually come the most prepared out of anybody for the meeting. They're good with their homework usually.
Yeah. Okay, so we're talking about lower interest rates coming our way. A lot of people might be wondering how that could impact the stock market. So as investors, what should we be thinking about when it comes to equities?
So, like I was talking about earlier in the show, if you are kind of hoping for a huge pop in the stock market after this, potential very likely interest rate cut happens in the next couple weeks, you're probably just not going to see that in the next, right after that happens, because like we mentioned, it's pretty much already priced in to the market.
Okay.
Now, if that continues, if we continue to get good, reports good CPI reports, good, inflation reports and everything, then there is a good chance that we see more rate cuts. And with more rate cuts, that is usually good for the markets.
Okay.
Because not only is it good, just having money a little cheaper to borrow, it for things like, buying houses and everything, but companies that have been taking on debt over the last couple of years, a lot of times will end up refinancing their debt in lower interest rate periods. So it can also be, helpful on the corporate side. So there is a really good chance that that would cause some growth in the stock market. How much, obviously we don't know, but I think the thought of that is obviously very exciting to the markets. You could see after the press conference, I forget where it was, but the big Federal Reserve meeting that they had, I think in Montana and Jackson Hole.
Oh, yeah.
That Jerome Powell spoke at a couple weeks ago. After he spoke, the markets really popped because it is something that they've been hoping for a while. But I mean, I think overall, I don't think that people, like we mentioned earlier this year, after the election and everything, even if there are some, potentially positive indicators like that, we still definitely don't believe that should be cause for people to go, way outside of their risk tolerance and their risk capacity to try and chase that excess return. Because they could all go just that smoothly. Right. And we could get a really great report next week. First rate cut could come in, inflation could stay down, and that could just keep rolling and no problem. And that'd be great. Yeah. But that's not a guarantee by any stretch of the imagination. So if you're somebody who's naturally, just saying, I want to, catch a little bit of upside, but I'm not super aggressive. I kind of like being a 50-50, 60-40 investor. I definitely don't think you should say, okay, well, there's going to be some interest rate cuts, so I need to go up to 80-20 or 90-10 and really try to catch this upside. Because yes, you could catch a little bit more upside doing that, but if things don't go exactly how you're hoping they will and how it looks like they may, you could also potentially catch a lot more downside. So I think that's where the importance of just kind of knowing yourself, knowing where you are in retirement, and, not necessarily changing your, allocation all the time based on what you think everything's going to do in the economy, because that is kind of trying to time the market, but maybe trying to take more advantage of things like, if you're early in retirement and the market's having a really good year, your portfolio's up, that's a good time to spend money. Actually, I tell people that a lot. Because, you're not really introducing a lot of sequence of return risk there. If you're 62 and you retired, I had someone recently retire, early 60s, and they came in for a review. They wanted to, spend a little bit more this year. It was going to end up being, probably a 5 or 6% withdrawal by the total end of the year, which is high for someone early in retirement. But when your investments have grown, double digits plus in the last 1 year, you're not nearly as worried about that as you would be if, you were down 10% year one and then you were going to pull an additional 5% or something like that off of it. So, maybe rather than things like, oh, we need to be way more aggressive, be thinking about, hey, if, this continues doing well, this would be a good time to pull some money out. If we're going to do some home renovations, maybe we do that now. If we're going to buy a car, maybe we do that now while, the market's more up, while we've caught a little bit more of that upside. So I do think there are still some opportunities, but, like we've said before, I don't think people need to be changing their entire strategy based on the hope of some additional interest rate cuts.
Right. And I want to just kind of give our listeners just a background. Since 1929, so we're talking almost 100 years ago, there have been 14 instances where there were Fed cut rates, and then 12 of those, the S&P posted positive returns over the following year. However, there were 2 periods where the rate cuts were followed by negative returns. That was in 2001, the dot-com bubble was down 13%, and in 2007, the mortgage crisis, it was down 17%. So just kind of interesting to see what has happened in the past.
Yeah. And that's a good point. So, I mean, statistically speaking, there's a pretty doggone good chance. But, like we say any year, I mean, I think I usually know these statistics off the top of my head, but I think it's roughly 7 out of 10 years, or it's high 70s, low 80s. That the S&P has been up historically, I believe.
So that's pretty good.
So, even just looking at that, you're like, most years there's a good chance. But that's not really what the average, investor, the moderate investor is thinking about. They're not thinking about how good those 7 or 8 years felt. They're thinking about how bad those 2 or 3 years felt. So, even so, there have been, 14 instances. I'm not saying that it's about to be the dot-com bubble or 2007. I certainly hope not. But, in those times, a lot of people, just average investors, didn't think it was going to be either. So,
Exactly.
You don't want to get caught with your pants down in a situation like that. But it is good kind of statistics to look at, and, kind of good encouragement to say that if you are somebody that's been nervous, if the last couple of years wasn't convincing enough with these statistics of the market historically after rate cuts, it looks pretty good for the next 12.
Okay, good to know. So the key is balance, right? Have a well-diversified portfolio. That would be good. And principal protected too, as well. And then, like you were just mentioning, reassess your portfolio risk in times like this. So, all right, all those are really, really good points. But in your experience, what do you believe is the single biggest challenge that retirees are facing right now when it comes to managing their income in this kind of environment?
Yeah, I think that I think the average retiree, when it comes to managing their income, probably has the hardest time finding a balance of where they should be spending, where they're not spending too much but not spending too little. It usually feels like you see one side of the spectrum or the other. We have some clients who we'll do a review with, and they'll need to withdraw for this, that, or the other. And at a certain point, we might have to sit down with them and say, hey, this is still your money. Like, we're not going to, obviously, it's your money to spend, not ours. But this is getting a little concerning. At a certain point, like, we have to, in our conscience, tell you that we're a little nervous about this rate. If you keep this up, there's a good chance that, you're going to spend down assets potentially much, much quicker into your retirement than you would like to. So that's the one side of the spectrum. And that's honestly not that many people, but they are out there. And, it's kind of an awkward conversation. It's not the one that you want to be having, but it's the one that some people need to hear. Mm-hmm. The other side of the spectrum is people who are just not spending enough. They're really nervous about, about their portfolio, even if it's been going up the last really 3 years now, pretty much double-digit returns. They're still really concerned about spending money. They don't want to see the numbers go down. They're really nervous about, the stock market keeping up over the future. They just want to see that number go up and up and up and don't, want to touch it. It can still be really hard to know, like, what is that balance, right? Because you might just say to yourself, oh, I'll just, take 4% every single year. And that might work for you. But for some people, you might have, a lot saved, and that percentage point might be a little bit higher, or you might retire a little bit later on, and that percentage point might be a little bit higher, or you might retire a little bit earlier on, and that might be a little bit lower. So I think that it really just depends on your situation, and also depends on, what you think, not just, the next year is going to look like, but what the next 10, 15, 20 years of spending are going to look like. And you can't totally know that, obviously, because you won't know till you get there. But there are some things that, I'll have people come in and say, oh, well, we're taking income, and we already took, this much in income this year. Maybe it was 3%. And then on top of that, we need to withdraw for like a car, and that's going to push us up to 5 or 6. And a lot of times my response is, well, you're not planning on buying a car every single year of retirement, right? And the answer is no. And it's like, okay, well, that's probably not going to be a big issue then. If you told me you're going to buy a new car every single year and, drive the other one off a bridge so you can't even resell it, then maybe this would be a problem. But if it's a one-time thing, you're not going to renovate your house every year. You're probably, not going to pay for college tuition for a grandkid every single year for the rest of your retirement. There's plenty of things that people do that is kind of, an upfront expense, or an expense that happens, over a couple years. That's like, we're spending a little bit more this year, but it's not going to be all the way through. So I think knowing that it's okay to do that sometimes, especially for people that, are 4 years into retirement, never taken anything out of their account.
Yeah.
You say, okay, well, if you spend, 7 or 8% of it this year, you haven't touched it in the last 5 years. So logic would say you probably won't, maybe next year unless you need to.
Right.
So for some people, I think that is the hard part.
Right.
Too. So it really is about finding that balance. You don't want to be that person that's just being totally careless. And, we at the firm, we want you to spend it all. Like if you want to spend it all, we want you to, but we don't want you to spend it all by the time you're 70 and live to 92 years old.
Exactly.
So, the old joke about, having your last check bounce on your deathbed is, kind of the goal for some people. But you don't want that to happen too soon.
Too soon, exactly. And that is the worry. But what we're offering is a chance for people to come in and visit with you guys, and you can help them come up with a retirement income plan, take them through your Rite Retirement process. As we get ready to close out our show, why don't you explain what that is, please?
Yeah, our process is really simple. It's really easy. When people come in for the first meeting, that's our discovery session. That meeting is really about just getting to know you, getting to know your situation, kind of just learning about what your ideal retirement looks like, and trying to find out, where we can fit into that, and the ways that we can help. So usually after that first meeting, after we've gone through, we've asked about you, asked about your family, your goals, then we'll get into a little bit of maybe a few recommendations of some smaller things, if there's some little cleanup items, because there are some things that, we can just kind of recognize in a first meeting. We don't have to, know you for 10 years to make some small recommendations here and there and say, hey, these are things we recommend you just go out and do right now. Go talk to someone, go talk to an attorney, talk to a CPA, talk to this person or that person to kind of clean up this item. From there, people will go on to, a strategy session where we'll look at a higher level view of the plan and more specific recommendations and kind of get into more of, how your retirement's going to look, some tax efficiency things, and really just touching on all of those different parts. And that all falls into our RITE process. So the RITE, R being retirement income, I being investments, T taxes, E estate planning. So we're trying to hit on all of those different things. Of course, we're not CPAs, we're not, attorneys, estate attorneys, but we have good referral networks. And the goal for a lot of those things is to, try to find opportunities where you could be improving. So we're not looking at that and saying, okay, you're not doing this, well, you're failing. Or we're not trying to find a gotcha of you can't retire. Because truthfully, for a lot of people that come into the office, their question is not so much, can I retire, but more so like, what does that look like? And how do I do that as efficiently as possible? People who have saved well, even if they sometimes need some reassurance, which they certainly do, I think deep down, know that they have the financial means to retire. But it's just more about, once I'm retired, what do I do with, with my taxes? What do I do with these accounts? How do I make sure my heirs are protected? What do I do with my Social Security strategy? So it becomes more of kind of the nuances, the small things, the things that you wouldn't think about quite so much. So that's kind of what our RITE process looks like. So if you want to come in and have a discovery session, you can give us a call at 256-937-2010. Again, that number is 256-937-2010. Thanks for being with me here today, Luann. I think Chris will be back with us next week, but I had a good time chatting with you as always.
Thank you so much, Graham. Love it. Always love hearing from you too.
Yes. So I hope everyone listening has an awesome and blessed week. Remember to serve every person and every situation with a servant heart.
Graham Bauer holds the enrolled agent designation, but is not currently offering tax preparation services. Neither the firm nor its agents may give tax advice. Individuals should consult with a qualified professional for guidance before making any purchasing decisions.
Investment advisory services made available through AE Wealth Management LLC, AEWM. AEWM and WG Financial Group are not affiliated companies. Insurance products are offered through the insurance business WG Insurance Services. WG Financial Group is an investment advisory practice that offers products and services through AE Wealth Management LLC, AEWM, a registered investment advisor. AEWM does not offer insurance products. The insurance products offered by WG Insurance Services are not subject to investment advisory requirements. AEWM and WG Financial Group are not affiliated companies. companies. Investing involves risk, including the potential loss of principal. Any references to protection, safety, or lifetime income generally refer to fixed insurance products, never securities or investments. Insurance guarantees are backed by the financial strength and claims-paying abilities of the issuing carrier. This radio show is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended to be used as the sole basis for financial decisions, nor should it be construed as advice designed to meet the particular needs of an individual situation. WG Financial is not permitted to offer, and no statement made during this show shall constitute tax or legal advice. Our firm is not affiliated with or endorsed by the U.S. government or any governmental agency. Information and opinions contained herein provided by third parties have been obtained from sources believed to be reliable, but accuracy and completeness cannot be guaranteed by WG Financial. This radio show is a paid placement.